It was 1943. As the Second World War continued with all its intensity, the oceans were no longer filled with just water. Every route was a major risk. Every ship was a potential target. Every military convoy advancing through the Atlantic was moving under an unseen threat. At that time, the war was not taking place only on the front lines. The war was also being carried out in laboratories, in shipyards, and behind closed doors. Technology had begun to become one of the most important weapons determining the fate of the war. Faster ships, more powerful weapons, and most importantly, not being seen by the enemy. It was precisely at this point that an ordinary warship anchored in Philadelphia placed itself at the center of a story that would remain the subject of debate even years later. Its official name was USS Eldridge. On paper, Eldridge was no different from other destroyer escorts. It was a warship built according to the Navy's routine program, designed for standard missions. It had neither a special weapon nor a secret mission disclosed to the public, but according to the claims, Eldridge was not undergoing an ordinary test that day. According to the accounts during the experiment conducted at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the area around the ship was suddenly covered by a strange fog. Witnesses described this fog as greenish, dense, and disturbing. After a while, the ship began to visibly fade. This was not an explosion. It was not a sinking. It was not an accident either. The ship was as if it had been pulled away from where it was. For minutes, there was only water in the harbor. Eldridge was gone. The crew was gone. Everything was engulfed in silence. And then, the ship returned. But according to the claims, what returned was no longer the same thing. From this point on, the accounts begin to lose their clarity. Some say the ship briefly appeared in another harbor. Some claim that the crew suffered serious psychological problems. Others argue that this story is entirely unfounded. The problem is that none of these claims ever completely disappeared over time. If this was only a rumor, why did it continue to be discussed for decades? If it was merely a misunderstanding, then why did so many contradictory stories emerge? And if nothing happened at all, why did the U.S. Navy always dismiss this matter briefly and definitively? This story, known as the Philadelphia Experiment, was born alongside these questions. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. We still cannot say with certainty whether this event truly happened, but there is one thing we are sure of. In 1943, something happened in Philadelphia, and what it was never fully explained. An idea in the shadow of war. In the early 1940s, the war being fought at sea was far quieter than the fighting on land, yet just as deadly. When a ship was hit, help was often impossible. Cold water, darkness, and lives lost within minutes. This was already the greatest fear for navies. The American Navy was well aware of this reality. German U-boats in particular were roaming the Atlantic like invisible hunters. Radar systems had advanced, but they were still limited. The moment a ship was detected, its fate was often sealed. Because of this, a new idea began to take shape within the Navy. If a ship was not detected before being attacked, it would not be sunk. At first, this idea was quite simple. But over time, more ambitious questions began to be raised. Could a ship be made completely invisible, not only on radar? When official records are examined, the work carried out at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard was actually focused on electromagnetic fields. However, the scope of these studies was never explained in detail. The documents were either limited or later made inaccessible. This uncertainty created suitable ground for rumors to grow. According to the accounts, engineers within the Navy aimed to create a protective bubble around the ship by using powerful electromagnetic fields. But how powerful this field would be and what kinds of side effects it might cause could not be fully anticipated. And according to some claims, this was exactly the point where things went out of control. Those who defend the experiment say their aim was solely radar invisibility. Critics, however, believe this explanation is incomplete. Because according to the accounts, the effect that occurred was not only technological, but also physical and psychological. The ship, together with the space around it, seemed to have entered an entirely different state. There is a striking detail here. In the stories describing the Philadelphia experiment, the success of the experiment is almost never mentioned. The side effects are always described. Loss of control is always emphasized. Unexpected outcomes are always brought to the forefront. And this raises the following question. If the experiment was successful, why were the results not proudly presented? Perhaps the experiment went far beyond the intended outcome. Perhaps it reached a point of no return. Or perhaps the results that emerged were unacceptable even from a military standpoint. None of these possibilities were officially confirmed, nor were they definitively denied. And this silence increased day by day the number of those who believed that the Philadelphia experiment was not merely a technical test. Because during wartime every idea can be tested, but not every outcome can be spoken of. Witnesses, letters, and contradictions. The most important reason the Philadelphia experiment has reached the present day is not official documents, in fact quite the opposite. This story remained in the public eye thanks to people who spoke about it years later. In the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s, claims about USS Eldridge were hardly discussed at all. No one spoke of the incident. There was no notable record in newspapers or military reports until some letters came to light. The most well-known author of these letters was someone named Carlos Miguel Allende. Allende claimed that he had served on a ship connected to the U.S. Navy and that he had witnessed the disappearance of the Eldridge. According to his writings during the experiment in Philadelphia, the Eldridge vanished for a moment. But the real issue was not the disappearance itself, but what happened afterward. Allende claimed that the crew suffered serious physical and psychological problems, that some sailors lost control of themselves, and that the incident was quickly covered up. These letters became a focal point for researchers of the time. However, they also raised serious doubts, because Allende's accounts were not consistent. There was confusion in the dates. Details changed over time. Some accounts did not align with the Navy's official duty records. For this reason, many argued that Allende was not reliable. Some researchers even suggested that he suffered from psychological problems, but the story did not end there. After Allende, other names also began to speak about the matter. There were even those who claimed to have served among the Eldridge's crew. There were accounts of sailors who were removed from duty after the experiment. Stories began to circulate about sailors said to have received long-term hospital treatment. The problem was that these accounts did not come from a single source. They were independent of one another. Yet their tone was remarkably similar. There was always talk of something having gone wrong. There was always mention of files that had been hastily closed. There was always a sense of an event that had gone unspoken. In contrast, the stance of the U.S. Navy did not change. Official statements were clear. There was no such thing as the Philadelphia experiment. USS Eldridge had never disappeared. What was being told consisted either of misunderstandings or fabrications. But there was a contradiction here as well. These testimonies shared another common feature. Those recounting the event often could not remember everything clearly. Events were blurred, timelines were fragmented, and details were missing. To some, this was proof that those recounting the event were unreliable. But some researchers argued the opposite, pointing to the traumatic nature of what had occurred. Because trauma does not clarify memories. On the contrary, it fragments them. What is experienced remains in the mind not as a complete story, but as disjointed moments. For this reason, most witnesses who spoke about the Philadelphia experiment expressed not what they saw, but what they could not fully explain. As if at the center of the story being told there was something left unspoken. Perhaps this is the most unsettling possibility about the event. Not the truth itself, but its incomplete remembrance. If this story is entirely fabricated, why was it discussed for so long? Why did different people in different periods tell similar stories? And most importantly, why were the documents related to this event never fully shared? At this point, the story splits in two. On one side, there are unreliable witnesses and accounts that contradict one another. On the other side, there are missing documents and a denial that is constantly repeated. So which one is the truth? Perhaps the answer to this question lies not in what the witnesses described, but in what was left unsaid. The human cost. In the stories describing the Philadelphia experiment, the most debated aspect is what happened to the people involved. Because what is described at this point implies that the event was far more than a technical experiment. According to the claims, after the experiment, some of the sailors who served aboard USS Eldridge were unable to return to their former selves. For some, this was described as a simple adjustment problem. Loss of concentration, sudden irritability, memory problems. These were not unusual conditions during wartime, but according to some accounts, these symptoms went far beyond ordinary limits. According to eyewitnesses, some members of the crew had lost their sense of reality. They could not remember where they were or what they were doing. For some, the sense of time seemed to have completely disappeared. In more disturbing accounts, physical consequences are mentioned. These claims are often considered exaggerated and cannot be proven. Yet they continue to be told. Some even claim that certain sailors merged with the metal structure of the ship. These accounts are generally interpreted metaphorically, but even this metaphor shows how deeply unsettling the events were perceived to be. There is an important detail at this point. These stories do not appear to have come from the imagination of a single person. In accounts coming from different sources, there is a similar theme. An experiment was conducted and control was lost, and its consequences on people were quite severe. Of course, these claims were never confirmed by official documents. The U.S. Navy rejects all of these claims. It states that the Eldridge crew continued with their normal duties. It states that there was nothing unusual in the records. But here, another question arises. During wartime, is everything that happens truly recorded? Is every psychological breakdown reported? Is every experiment documented, even if it fails? There are no clear answers to these questions. Perhaps this is why the claims about the human cost of the Philadelphia experiment are so powerful, because they offer no certainty. Yet they continue to keep a disturbing possibility alive. If everything that is told is unfounded, why did these stories remain in the public eye for so long? And if even a small part of it is true, one question comes to mind. What was tested on people in Philadelphia that day? Why is it still being talked about? What separates the Philadelphia experiment from other war stories is that it never reached a definitive conclusion. In this event, there is neither a victory nor a clear failure. There are only questions left unanswered. Over the years, the position of the U.S. Navy did not change. Official statements always remained the same. The experiment did not take place. USS Eldridge did not disappear. What was told was unreal. But these statements, rather than ending the story, only made it grow even larger. Because history has shown us this time and time again, no matter how much some events are covered up, they never completely disappear. They only change form. The Philadelphia experiment became exactly such a story. This event involves more than just whether a ship disappeared or not. It shows us how far the limits of science can be pushed during wartime. It reveals how human life can be pushed into the background for the sake of a strategic objective. Perhaps Eldridge was never truly invisible. Perhaps most of what was told was misinterpreted. Perhaps everything consisted only of a few letters and the imagination of a few individuals. But one thing is also true. There are gaps in the documents related to the Philadelphia experiment. The explanations are superficial, and there are gaps. The human mind does not like gaps. When it cannot find answers, it begins to create its own questions. This is why the Philadelphia experiment is still being talked about, because this story raises the question of what was left untold, more than the question of what happened. Perhaps one day all the documents will be opened, or perhaps this story will never become clear. But one thing is certain. Whatever happened in Philadelphia in 1943 was never fully told. And like every untold story, this one continues to live on. This event was claimed to be an experiment kept under control. But there are some events that neither begin as an experiment nor end under anyone's control.